Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening. I'd like to call to order the April 15th, 2021 meeting of the Santa Barbara Harbor Commission. Angela, could you call the roll, please?
Yes, of course. Commissioner Kramer,
Present.
Commissioner McCray,
Present.
Commissioner Nelson,
Present.
Commissioner Sloan,
Here.
Commissioner Stanowicz,
Here.
Commissioner Stedman,
Here.
and Chair Sly is absent at tonight's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda this evening?
Acting Chair McCray, no changes to the agenda. It's going as is.
Very good. Do we have any public comment at this time?
At this time, there are no hands raised, but I do want to remind the public that if they would like to make a public comment on something that is not on the agenda at this time, they can indicate that by using the raise and lower your hand icon on the control panel. And I still do not see any hands raised.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the first item of the evening is the consent calendar approval of the minutes. We have a recommendation that we waive further reading.
So moved.
We have a second.
A second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Let's see, I'd like to turn to Mr. Mike Wiltshire for the director's report at this time.
Perfect, thank you. Good evening, commissioners, and anybody who's tuned in. Again, I'm Mike Wiltshire, Waterfront Director, so I'll be giving a brief update from my director's report. And again, my update's pretty brief, so unless there's any comments or questions up front, I'll dive into it. I'm hearing none. Next slide, Angela. All right, so as I've been doing in past meetings, I'll provide a brief update on COVID and how it's impacting the waterfront. So you've seen this graph before. So this is the case count graph, which is tracked by Santa Barbara County Health. All this information is available on the County Health website, which is at the bottom there. That's really the main resource that I use for all this data and updates on coronavirus. So as you can see, the case count lately, it's been moving in the right direction. So there was a brief spike last Friday where the daily case count jumped over 100. But in looking into the fine print, that was really due to kind of a data true up. So all in all, we're really moving in the right direction with case count. If you look really closely at this graph, there's a faint red line on this graph at 28 cases per day. And so that's really our new magic number that needs to be sustained for us to move into the next tier, which is the orange tier. And with cases going this way, they're currently averaging below the 28 cases per day. So I'm optimistic that in coming days, maybe a week or so, that I'm guessing Santa Barbara County will move into the less restrictive orange tier as soon as within the next week or two. Next slide, Angela. All right, so this is a state slide, and this shows a map of all California counties and what tier they're in. So as you can see by this map, it's changed a little bit since last time we met. So at this point, the majority of California counties have moved into the less restrictive orange tier. And that includes all the counties to the south of us. So LA and Ventura and some of the bigger counties. So really what the orange tier means for the waterfront is a loosening of restrictions on business. So some of the main changes are increasing dining to 50% indoor dining at restaurants and 50% indoor capacity at museums. So this really affects the Maritime Museum and Sea Center, and 100% capacity at retail and charter boats. So currently the county is classifying charter boats as retail. And so as long as that maintains and we move into the orange tier, they'll be able to operate at 100% capacity. And just to know, the last few weeks down here have been really vibrant. So with the good weather and businesses opening up, both the harbor and Stearns Wharf have really begun seeing a pretty healthy increase in business. So I certainly want to take this opportunity to let everybody know that businesses are open and they're doing so safely. So certainly come down and support the mix of tenants down here. It's really kind of turning the corner, and it is vibrant and really good to see.
So
Next
when
slide.
we reach orange, will the waterfront office open up and we will have our May meeting in person?
Great question. Next slide, and I'll speak to that. So waterfront staff has been working pretty diligently to get our public counters ready to open and safely. So we've made some physical modifications as well as traffic flow modifications. As you know, at our office, it's a pretty tight corridor and a pretty enclosed space for people to be coming in and passing each other. So we've kind of worked on a way to improve that. And the real crux is, so the waterfront department is working with the entire city. And so we're kind of angling to open when other city public counters open as kind of a measure of clarity. So when Parks and Rec and Public Works and Community Development and all these outward facing city public counters open, we're trying to do it in lockstep with that. So although as of today, we're still conducting business virtually, I believe the city is getting pretty close to a decision on reopening counters for in-person service. So definitely more to come, but there was talk of tying it to the orange tier. So I think that will prompt a fair amount of, put a bit of pressure on opening the public counters. As far as public meeting goes, that's kind of a different animal. We're probably going to take some lead from city council on that when we're going to start conducting meetings in public. Part of that is that we don't want to kind of limit accessibility after having made these so accessible and create this kind of tier where those who are vaccinated or feel safe can participate, but there isn't really an outlet for the others. So there might be kind of like a shoulder season where we still do the virtual meetings in Zoom until we're really squared away and can get back into public meetings. Did that answer your question, Commissioner Nelson?
Yeah, it did.
All right. Any other questions on COVID or impacts to the waterfront before I move on? All right, hearing none, I'll move on to the next slide. All right, so shifting gears a little bit, I wanted to update the commission on the status with our tenants and deferred rents. I know this is a big topic. And just for a little history on this, COVID really became mainstream here in California in March of last year. And shortly after that, the city council approved what is called the Temporary Eviction Moratorium Ordinance, or TEMO it gets called. And that was really the ordinance that gave tenants, our tenants, waterfront tenants and tenants citywide, the ability to defer their rent due to economic impacts from COVID. Stepping forward a little bit, of the 61 waterfront tenants, 16 of those participated in the deferred rent program to some degree and deferred some amount of rent. The remaining 45 tenants continued to pay rent as usual over the course of the last year. Stepping back to the timeline, so in November 2020, City Council terminated the temporary eviction moratorium ordinance, and that effectively ended the option to defer rents as of December 31st, 2020. So really what that resulted in is a 9-month rent deferral period from April 2020 through December 2020. And in that 9 months, all told, the waterfront tenants deferred roughly $1.6 million in rents during that time. And so the majority of those rents are still outstanding and due to the waterfront. What this did for our budget and our operations is it essentially turned the waterfront department into a bank, and we had to, because those rents are money that we use to run our operation. And in deferring them, we essentially became a bank that lent out at $1.6 million at zero interest. So it's a significant portion of our budget and took a significant amount of thought to kind of manage that year. It is a pretty big chunk of money. Most recently, in February of 2021, Council adopted an emergency ordinance giving departments a lot more ability and a lot more freedom to freely negotiate with our tenants on that deferred rent payback. And so as such, we've engaged with the majority of our tenants and discussed possible payback structures to really help ensure that we, the waterfront, can recover as much of that deferred rent as reasonable while still kind of providing some leniency for tenants that are in need of relief. Any questions thus far? I've got a little more on this, but I wanted to stop now and see if there are any questions on that.
So Mike, on that, negotiating with the tenants so far, what's the sunset on getting paid back that 1.6 to where we stand today?
Yeah, Angela, do you want to hop to the next slide? I might be able to answer that through there. So, and stop me if I don't answer your question here, but I'll go through this and see, because I think this might provide some clarity on it. So to outline our proposals to tenants who participated in the rent program, we really kind of came up with two scenarios. So the rent deferral program was really intended to help those who really suffered significant impact, those who really had legitimate hardship due to COVID. And so with that in mind, the waterfront established a criteria for economic hardship. And so what that was is any tenant who suffered a revenue loss of greater than 25% compared to their last 3 normal years of average revenue, we considered that kind of a real economic hardship. Out of the 61 tenants, 16 participated in the rent deferral. Of those 16, 9 of our tenants met that economic hardship threshold. So as you all know, there were winners and losers. Some tenants did really well and some had legitimate hardship. So it really came down to 9 tenants that we were dealing with. And so what we did with these tenants is provided them an option and really stretched out that payback period up to 4 years. And so the deferred rent can be paid back over a period of 4 years with some incentives to pay back earlier. And so this really allows each of those tenants to kind of make business decisions that work for them and capitalize on some incentives and discounts if they are able to pay it back earlier and we're able to see that money sooner. So ultimately, it's a pretty legitimate amount of relief stretching out the payback period by that amount of time, as well as incentivizing earlier paybacks. And then to touch on those that did not meet the economic hardship criteria, so those are tenants whose revenues were 75% or higher of their 3-year average compared to the last 3 years. They were still given the benefit of deferred rent, so they received this kind of zero interest loan in the form of deferred rents. And they were also given the opportunity to take until December of this year, so December 2021, to pay back those rents. In general, I've been out meeting with the tenants personally, and in general, this proposal was well received. I think it was a good kind of happy medium and within the ability of the water, really kind of at the upper limit of what we could do from a budget point of view, but it was well received. And so a number of waterfront tenants have started to pay back some of their deferred rents. So this really gives the flexibility if people have a big spring, a big summer, they can start to kind of chip away at this deferred rent. And that's showing. So one good thing is we've received some of our March numbers, and Brian will touch on it a little bit later. But March and April are looking to be quite busy. So some of the restaurant tenants have been having a banner month, and so that's good. I mean, optimistically, we stay on that trajectory, and people stay prosperous, and it's a big summer. So I'm hopeful. Did that get to your question, Commissioner Sloan?
Yeah, and I just have one on this slide. So of that 1.6, how much would be paid back by December 31st of this year? just ballpark? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't have that offhand, but not much. The lion's share of the deferred rent is from those who suffered economic hardship. And so I wager a guess of about 75% of it qualifies for that longer term deferred payback. So yeah, kind of the big players are the ones that had economic hardship and were the bulk of the ones who deferred their rent.
Okay.
Any other questions on that deferred rent topic?
Have all 9 of the eligible economic hardships indicated their desire to jump into the 4-year payback?
Well, that was kind of the uniqueness of the program is they don't really have to agree or set up a timeline with us. So it really is just extended over 4 years with larger incentives to be paid back in the first year compared to the second year, compared to the third year and fourth year. So they've all agreed to participate in the payback program, and it really comes down to how much they can pay back sooner to receive that incentive. So there's no committing to when they'll pay it back, and it could go out as long as 4 years, but we really wanted to give them the flexibility to see if they have a strong year or a strong summer or a strong next year, and maybe they can pay it all back in those years.
Okay.
I have a question. Yeah, I was just wondering, what are the incentives for the early payback for those 9 tenants? Are there
Yeah.
like a bunch of them, or is there like one that kind of sticks out among the others?
It's the same proposal for all 9 of the tenants. And so the incentive is any amount of deferred rent that's paid back prior to December 31st of this year will receive a 20% discount. Any deferred rent that's paid back by the end of next year, so 2022, receives a 10% discount, and the third year a 5%. And if it's paid back within the fourth year, there'll be no discount. And at the end of 4 years, then all deferred rent is due, or they'll be considered in default.
Okay, thanks.
All right, good question. Anything else on that? All right, well, thanks. I know it's a big topic, so I think it was important to update you where we're at with it. But again, it was fairly well received, and I think it's a good middle ground to get everybody through this. Next slide, Angela. All right, so I'll wrap up with a few of the items on our tentative proposed list. So first on the list, so we will be having a 20-foot slip lottery in the near future. I believe it is at the May meeting, so next meeting. The application process is open now. It closes on April 21st. So the application can be accessed through the Waterfront website. And I think it's pretty exciting. So I think it's pretty rare when slips get raffled off like this. So it's kind of a unique occurrence, and that'll be happening next meeting for all of those that apply between now and April 21st. Additionally, we're planning to provide an update on the East Beach mooring field permit. So that permit's still in process, but Mr. Engebretson will give an update on that at a future meeting. And we're in the process of lining up a presentation from the County Air Pollution Control District. I don't know if that's locked in yet, but it's maybe June or May or June meeting. And this is a new topic, but possibly looking to have a discussion at some point about insurance requirements for vessels in the harbor. So I know this item has some history and has been discussed before, but it was again recently brought to my attention for possible discussion. So I'd like to kind of keep that on the radar for the commission and try to find a slot for it at a meeting in the near future. And so with that, I'm happy to take any questions before I turn it over to Mr. Bossy for his budget update.
Yeah, the only comment I would have is I think the last item on tonight's agenda is some other presentations we might be adding in the near future as well, but we'll get to that when we get there.
Okay, perfect.
Is there anybody else? With that, I'd like to turn to Mr. Brian Bossy.
Good evening, Mr. Acting Chair and Commissioners. Thank you for being here with us this evening. I have a quick, well, not a quick, but a business services report where before we get into it, I want to kind of set some parameters in that I'm going to give you a very broad overview of our numbers through the end of the third quarter, which is March 31st. I want to preface that by saying our third quarter numbers just came out Tuesday evening. So we haven't had a lot of time to digest these numbers, analyze, compare, contrast. We've done the best that we can do in the time that we've been provided. So instead of a normal 30,000 foot look that we give you, I'm hovering more at the 60,000 foot level. So I will do my best to answer any detailed questions you have, but I'm going to try to stick with the big picture because really that's all we've been able to put together so far. That's why there isn't an actual report in your binder this month. It's just what we could cobble together since we got the numbers Tuesday evening. Next slide, please. Okay, so our third quarter revenues as of March 31st. Big picture down in the bottom right, you'll see we're at 78% of our budgeted revenues through 75% of the year. That looks pretty good. We're about 3% above if you were just to strictly, block it up 25, 25, 25, and 25. That's not generally how it works, but we're happy to see that number. As far as property management is concerned, we're at 77%, so we're a little above what we budgeted. And keep in mind that our fiscal year 2021, as you recall, we had to go back and completely redo everything before it was submitted in late May due to the ongoing effects of COVID. So it's been significantly reduced from prior years. Nonetheless, we do see some light at the end of the tunnel, as Mr. Wiltshire mentioned, as far as possibly going into the orange tier. He also mentioned we've seen some very busy weekends down here. I believe one weekend in March in parking, we had our busiest Sunday in March that we've ever had on record. So we're getting a lot of people down here, and I hope that continues. And I think if we're able to move into the orange tier, that will continue. So as far as property management is concerned, our commercial tenants are doing really well. They're about 3.3% above last year. That's about $45,000, but that's folks like our yacht brokers, Harbor Marine Works, the Harbor Market, places like that. Basically, almost anything outside of restaurants. As far as the restaurants are concerned, they continue to be impacted, but again, we're seeing a glimmer of hope out there. They're down about 18%. If you recall, in February, when we gave you the mid-year report, they were down significantly more than that. So they have gained some ground. We're hoping that continues. Our financial management continues to underperform. That's primarily because of low interest rates, but also the fact that we have less money invested in those programs. Our parking services continues to, similar to restaurants, be impacted by COVID. However, as I mentioned, we're starting to see an uptick in people coming down, which is a good thing. So as Mr. Wiltshire mentioned, please come on down and support your local restaurants and businesses. Our marina management is having a really good year. Our slip transfers are just amazing. They've been up, let me see it, sorry, I've got to look at my notes here. They are up 43% over last year at the same time. So, and recall last year, if we were in April of 2020, we would have only had numbers where 2 weeks were impacted by COVID. So these numbers for marina management are very positive. We also have our visitor fees. Those revenues are up over 33% versus last year. So people still want to come here. They still want to buy boats. They still want to get into the harbor. So that's definitely a good thing. Next slide, please. So we did our best, again, with the time that we had to put together some projections on how we see the year ending. And it's significantly improved over when we were with you mid-year. Big picture, we think that we are going to meet and slightly exceed our projected revenues for fiscal year 2021. And that's a good thing. we've got a big hole to climb out of, obviously, but these are all signs pointing in the right direction. As far as our property management is concerned, we feel that we're going to come in slightly above budgeted revenues, especially if we're going to hit this orange tier. I think we're going to see a big turnaround in business for a number of our folks. Our financial management program, there's not a lot we can do with that. That's a city managed program. We don't have a lot of say in that, but be assured that it's throughout the organization. Our parking services, right now we're about 10% below where we were last year, but we think we're going to improve on that, especially if we have weekends like we have the past few. I know the next 2 weekends are looking like good weather, so we're hopeful that people are going to be coming down here. So we will be lower, but hopefully it won't be that 8% below. And then marina management, again, continuing on track, we look to be about 6% above our budgeted revenue. So again, another good sign. But again, big hole to climb out of. We're going to do our best and hope for the best as we move into less restrictive tiers, or hopefully move into less restrictive tiers. Next slide, please. And here are our expenditures through the third quarter. Again, 75% through the fiscal year, and we've only spent just under 64% of our budget, and that's a good thing. Again, our salaries and benefits continue to save us a good deal of money. We've had a number of positions open. We're slowly filling those, but the time that they were open saved both in salaries and benefits. We've also, as you folks know, significantly reduced our capital program. We've reduced our supplies and services everywhere we could. And I believe Mr. Nelson commented last time we met, are we going to continue to roll these in? We are, to the point where we can continue to preserve customer service. And, but again, this was a good exercise to see where we could, trim some fat. We're a very lean organization as it is. I believe we've only had 2 new employees over the past 18 years. And in that time frame, our revenues have doubled, and we've become a much more complex organization just with what we do. So we're going to do our best to continue to be a lean organization. I'm sure that won't be a problem. As far as our expenditures, again, things that are tick over the 75%, limit our interest, and that's on our loans that we have out there. But again, those are front loaded towards the front end of the year. Those 2 numbers are the same that you saw last month. But in the end, we're just under 64%. So we're still holding out. We're saving money as best we can, where we can, and trying to continue to have very good customer service. So we do anticipate year end, similar to last time we brought this to you a few months ago. We anticipate we're going to be below our budgeted expenditures by about $1.75 million. So we've really cut back, and that's a good thing. It probably won't be able to last to that degree going forward, but we're going to do our best. Next slide, please. Okay, that was it. That was the 50 to 60,000 foot view. I'm happy to answer any questions, or do my best to answer any questions for you with the information we provided to you.
Are there any questions?
Hey, Brian, so we'll get a report in July or August on how the year ended. Is that correct?
So that usually comes out. So again, our system takes a while to close out, especially year end. That's a massive effort on our finance department. We usually come to you in September with the preliminary year end results. So the fiscal year ends the end of July. August, I can't remember if we're having a meeting in August or not, but it usually takes about 6 weeks after that to get some good numbers and good analysis for you. So yeah, you will have that follow-up, and I'll be able to update you even next month with more detail as far as the Q3 results and where we're at. Again, we've had 36 hours to try and put something together. So I'll have some more detail as we get down into it, and hopefully some more detailed projections, especially moving every day helps as far as activity down here, and we'll hopefully have some better numbers for you
Okay,
next month.
you said that you just said that the year ends at the end of July or the end of June?
Sorry, the year ends at the end of June,
Okay.
but it usually takes, even to get preliminary numbers, July and into August. So
There's a lot of information there, I get.
there's a lot of information, and it's slow and frustrating, but that's what we do.
And then, so how do we factor in that repayment plan that Mike talked about before? Will that show up in the budget as a line item, or how will that be shown moving forward over the next 4 years?
So that's a great question. So it's something we're working with our finance department on how to categorize that, having never been in this position. And folks in finance, same thing. So we're working with them to try and figure that out. But as Mike said, we've got, I believe it was 7 tenants who are required to pay up by the end of this fiscal year. If I'm not mistaken, 4 of those have already paid in full. So that'll be a nice boost. And then, come December, assuming everybody waits till December, we'll get another influx of money, a few $100,000. But those 9 who are the economic hardship in the economic hardship program, 2 of those tenants alone equal more than almost $900,000 of the total 1.6 that we were originally due. So that's a massive amount of money. We're hoping that they'll be able to take advantage of the incentives and pay back early as opposed to later. So we're gonna track that. It's all kind of new math for everybody, and hopefully something we won't have to go through again. But we're figuring that out with our finance department and our trustee accounting staff, including Damian Goodall. So
Okay.
we're in good hands as far as that's concerned, figuring that out.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions?
Yes, I'm curious how we will restore funding for capital projects that have been either deferred or delayed.
Okay, I think part of that, and I'll let Mike jump in. My understanding is we're going to see how our revenues play out, and as we begin to climb out of this hole, this financial hole, kind of assess our priority capital projects and move from there. Capital is something we delve into and come before you, I believe, every October. So as the revenue picture, again, hopefully continues to improve, we can adjust on the fly as we've done in the past through this whole process. Mike, you want to add to that? Or correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that was great. The only other piece is we're budgeting a use of reserves, putting us below our policy level. And so one of our first orders of business is if revenues start getting back up to normal, we really need to backfill our reserves to at least policy level. And then once those reserves are at policy level, we can start spending that remainder on deferred capital projects.
Okay,
I just have a follow-up to that. Mike, you just mentioned that we're drawing our reserves down below, and that certainly makes a lot of sense for the revenue picture, but are we staying within our loan covenants with DBA?
Yeah, that's a good question, and Brian can hop in too. We just recently sent a letter off to basically our loan providers, ensuring them, yes, we're in no jeopardy of dropping below our requirements with our loans. Just we've basically tapped into our reserves kind of further than we typically do, but that's what they're for. We're required to keep a minimum of $2 million in our harbor preservation fund. And going into this budget cycle where we've budgeted a use into those reserves. So if revenues come in more optimistically than we budgeted, then that's good news. We won't need to go into those reserves and we can kind of backfill the capital program. But to be sure, there's no concern with meeting our debt obligation.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions or comments?
I guess I'm curious, will you rather than in October, just sort of informing us with what the situation is in terms of backfilling the reserve or restoring funding for capital projects, will the budget committee subcommittee have an opportunity to take a look at your proposed restoration of deferred projects, or the impact of how much you're putting back into the reserves?
Yeah, that'll all happen through the budget process. So we'll again have quarterly, mid-year, third quarter, and ultimately our 1 year review of the budget. And so I don't anticipate that all happening super quickly. Capital is fairly slow. So what'll likely happen is we'll enact the capital program that we've planned for the coming year. And we'll really need to wait and see where we land out a year from now. And that's when we'll be able to understand if we've met our reserve requirements and start programming capital for the following year.
Okay.
Anything more?
Oh, yeah, I just have one quick question. Regarding the payback incentives for those tenants, if they decide to take that 20% incentive, is there any plan for us to recapture that rent, or are we just kind of taking that as a like a budget write-off there?
I'm happy to jump in. The way we structured this was we want to do as much as we can with the powers that we have, if you will, to keep our tenants in business. The last thing we want is an empty restaurant, a restaurant to close down and leave, because that's 9 to 12 months of process to get a new business in there, and that's a lot of rent. So that would be kind of the worst case scenario. So what we try to do is develop something that would allow them, we're going to take it on the chin a little bit, but not as bad as it could be. And so the 20% incentive, I don't anticipate, those 9 all being able to come by December 31st and pay that. In a sense, it would be great because that would give us a nice influx of cash. I don't anticipate they'll be doing that. I figure some of them will, but they'll probably put together what they can to make that happen and get 20% off of whatever they can contribute. So we are going to take it a little bit on the chin, but not nearly as bad as it could be.
Okay, great, thanks.
It looks like we're good here. All right, before I turn to Brian Adair for the facilities management report, Angela, if we get public comments in any one of these sections of the department update, just let me know and we'll stop and hear them between the different reports.
Will do. Thank you, Commissioner McRae. At this time, there's still no hands raised.
Very good. Thank you. Brian Adair, please.
Hello, Commissioners. This is Brian Adair, Facilities Department. Next slide, please. Just to give you an update on the underground storage tank replacement, BT service station contractors mobilized on March 8th. 2 new 20,000 gallon underground storage tanks were set in place on April 2nd. Construction is now moving forward with minimal Harbor Way traffic interference until they repave the area on top of the tanks, the construction site. Project is on schedule and expected to be completed before the end of May. Next slide, please. These are 2 photographs of the tanks being lowered into the underground pit, just to give you an idea. Next slide, please. And this is a video. Christopher Bell in our department was very helpful to capture this for us, just to give you a sense of the size of the project. And this is 1 of 2 tanks going into the pit. Next slide. This is a photograph I took 2 days ago of the construction site, just to give you an idea where they are currently. Next slide. The underground storage project and sewer line During the excavation of the site, a sewer line was broken on March 17th. A temporary fix was completed right away by Public Works Wastewater Division. The Wastewater Division surveyed the existing sewer main and decided to replace a 266-foot section along Harbor Way due to its age and its position of being just under the asphalt. We were worried that it would collapse if a heavy vehicle, truck or something came across. So we did a job bid walk on April 13th to replace the sewer line and to encase it in concrete to protect it going forward. The replacement work is scheduled for the week of May 17th. So we're trying to get this all done and minimize disruption to our tenants and tourists. Next slide, please. Well, this diagram shows, the red line in this diagram shows the section of sewer main that we're going to be replacing. Any questions?
Who pays?
Pardon me?
Who pays for the replacement of the sewer line?
Because it's considered the infrastructure, the sewer main infrastructure, the wastewater department is paying for this. The section of pipe that broke is be about $5,000 for that temporary repair. We haven't discussed that with the general contractor or the owner of who is going to pay for that, but most likely the waterfront has to talk about that to the project owners.
Well, that's good news. Thank you.
Next slide, please. A sandberm update. The Ledbetter sand berm was deconstructed on March 4th, and the Mission Creek sand berm will stay in place as is. The waterfront requested Cushman Contracting to return to Ledbetter Beach on April 8th to taper an additional 300 feet of beach frontage west of Maintenance Yard. This will allow for an easier removal of the Hobie cats from the waterfront up to their storage areas, which they are permitted from April to October. Next slide, please. The photo on the left kind of shows you the steep slope that they were challenged with, and the bulldozers is tapering that down so it's easier for them to remove their Hobie cats. Next slide, please. We're in the middle of our Stearns Wharf annual repairs, and this is an update. Cushman Contracted was awarded a $238,000 contract for the 2021 Stearns Wharf annual repairs, which started on March 22nd. All 25 new piles will be installed by tomorrow. Next week, April 19th, 4 splice piles will be installed under Harbor Restaurant. And then all remaining work will be completed the last week of April in the evening. That will be replacing the 2,100 square feet of deck boards, replace any stringers or pile caps as necessary. Next slide, please. The rectangle area in red shows where we're going to be replacing most of the deck board. We're also going to be replacing a small portion at the very foot of the wharf. We have a situation that's weakening, and we want to address that now than later. Next slide, please. This is a photograph of one of the piles being placed, and the gentleman in the dark black jacket, I'd like to thank him. That's Kyle Langlier. He's our maintenance mechanic, and he's been on the project every day, logging and documenting and helping the contractors to help us keep us on schedule. So it takes many people to do a project, and I just report on it. Next slide, please. The Federal Channel dredging update. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers contracted with Pacific Dredge and Construction, LLC, to dredge Santa Barbara's Federal Channel twice per year. Spring cycle started Monday, April 12th, and will be completed on Thursday, April 22nd. There will be 2 additional days for demobilization. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers have approved to remove 155,000 cubic yards this cycle. Next slide, please. These are two current photos that were taken 2 days ago, and this is a sand spit, and we got a lot of sand since our last cycle. Next slide, please. This is a discharge area that's to the south of the Marriott Hotel on East Beach. Next slide, please. That concludes my presentation. Any questions?
Hey, Brian, you guys are doing a lot of repairs to the wharf. How about the fire suppression system that runs underneath the wharf? Have you tested that recently, or is that being tested concurrently?
It's a good question, Commissioner. I'll check into what is the preventive maintenance schedule on it. They do cycle it to wet the boards underneath the wharf, but I don't know if that's seasonal or all year round. So I have to research that a bit. But we do use a trailer to wet the surface of the wharf starting on a Friday to get it wet for the weekend. But I'll have to research that question and get back to you.
Oh yeah, no, I would appreciate a little feedback on that.
Brian, I have a question. So where are we in the contract cycle between the Corps of Engineers and the dredge company? Is this are we starting a new contract, or are we in the middle or end of it?
We're towards the end of that cycle. It's a 3.5 year contract. Mike Wiltshire may remember, but I think it's a 3-year contract. I hesitated to put that in the presentation today, but left it out. But I'll confirm that as well. But I believe it's a 3-year contract.
I think it is 3 years.
Yeah, it's a 3-year contract with 2 cycles per year. So this one right now will be the 4th cycle. So we're kind of 2/3 of the way through the contract. We got 1 more year next year.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Do we have further questions? All right, with that, I'd like to turn to Mr. Eric Ingebretson for the Harbor Operations Report.
Well, good evening, Vice Chair McRae and commissioners, members of the public that don't know me. My name is Eric Ingebretson, and I'm the Harbor Operations Manager. And with that, we'll start our Harbor Operations Report. Next slide, please. National Safe Boating Week is upon us. It starts May 22nd and runs through Memorial Day weekend. And the main goal is to promote boating safety awareness during this week. We certainly hope that boating safety is on the minds of everybody throughout the year, but it's a particularly strong emphasis on safety and responsibility while operating all types of vessels. The Harbor Patrol's mission will be to educate and enforce boating rules and regulations, and we'll also take particular note for any boating under the influence violations. With Safe Boating Week, next slide, please. Personal flotation devices, they're huge. They save lives. Everyone should wear a properly fitted U.S. Coast Guard approved PFD. Every child under 13 years of age must wear a properly fitted type 1, 2, or 3 PFD per California boating law. Statistic here, quick, 76% of all fatal boating accidents, the victims drowned. Of those victims, 84.5% were not wearing their PFDs. Next slide, please. So in a nutshell, they save lives. We need to be responsible, make sure that our friends and our loved ones are wearing life jackets. I can't stress enough. Additionally, next slide, please. Don't mix alcohol with boating. Operating a vessel while under the influence of alcohol of 0.8 is a misdemeanor. The penalties are up to a year in county jail and fines up to $1,000. Any personal injury, the district attorney can prosecute those violations as a felony. And it is worth noting that approximately half of all marine fatalities are alcohol related. Next slide, please. So check the weather conditions. As you can see, this great picture from my office. It is awesome. So yeah, check the latest marine weather forecast, monitor changing conditions, plan several days ahead of time. Listen and watch for extended outlooks, especially in our channel if you're going to the islands. I do it often when I go with friends out to the islands. You can go to www.weather.gov/marine, which is National Weather Service. You can go to Marine Weather Radio VHF Channel 3, and there's other sites as well. Windy.com is another great site that I use as well. Next slide, please. So the idea is just to reinforce to travel responsibly. You owe it to your family, your friends, everybody else on the water, people swimming. Carry your life jackets, GPS, distress signals. Marine radio is a great tool to have. You really need to be able to talk to people out on the water, especially the Coast Guard if you need help, if you're farther out than the Harbor Patrol's jurisdiction. Again, the Harbor Patrol monitors 12 and 16, 24/7. And again, I can't stress the importance of personal flotation devices. Respect the rights of others. A lot of time folks are boating that are in the know, but then we get a lot of folks out of town that don't know all the rules and regulations. So we have to be courteous to those folks as well. File a float plan with a relative or a friend and check the weather. Again, that's important. Know your state's boating laws, educate yourself, and of course, we're all in it to have fun. Any questions? Next slide, please. Well, another event that's coming back in May is Harbor Watch. It was modeled after our Neighborhood Watch program. It's a citizen-based group here in the harbor who work together to spot crime and report crime. Next slide, please. And over time, the Harbor Watch program morphed into a general exchange of information, if you will, between harbor users and the Harbor Patrol. We have a lot of dedicated staff with the Harbor Patrol that they're certified in CPR or EMT classes. And in this picture here to the right, we have Officer Hubbard, who spearheads our CPR and first aid and the Harbor Watch program, which includes flare demonstrations and discharge of flares in a controlled environment, firebox hose deployment, that you might see those boxes on the dock, but there is a certain way that you want to deploy that hose first before charging the line. Next slide, please. And video, if it works. Again, the fire extinguisher demonstrations, tentatively scheduled COVID mindful event will take place on the 18th of May at 5:30 on the beach southwest of the Yacht Club. And we will be having flare demonstrations and a practical for that as well. Any questions on Harbor Watch? Next slide, please. So after a pretty long recruitment process, we brought aboard Chris Schrake. He's our newest Harbor Patrol officer. In this slide, he's not a trainee. At the time of application, he was, but he did obtain all of his certifications, and now he is an entry-level Harbor Patrol officer. Chris is a Santa Barbara local with a diverse background in ocean-related sports. He's committed to outstanding public service. This individual is extremely motivated. He reached out to me almost 3 years ago asking me what certifications and education and what have you to follow the path of Harbor Patrol. And he did this all on his own. And I'm really proud to have him aboard. So please welcome Chris to the Waterfront family. Next slide, please. Operation Clean Sweep date has been changed. As I reported last commission meeting, it was scheduled for Saturday. As you know, this is the 13th annual event. It's been canceled 2 years in the past. It's targeting this year the Cuda Dock, Fish Float North, and the City Pier. We did move it to Sunday, May 16th to avoid any conflict with the Saturday Fisherman's Market. And we also wanted to make sure that our divers in the water were safe. We know we get some boating traffic over at the City Pier, and we just wanted to make sure those folks were safe. And again, as stated earlier, we've collected 21 tons of debris from the ocean floor, and this year we're combining it with a harbor neighborhood cleanup as well. So if boaters have items that they want to take off their boat, we will bring an additional 40-yard dumpster for folks to go ahead and dispose of those items from the marinas and their boats. We will have an e-waste drop off as well at both sites. And again, coffee and donuts. I look forward to seeing you all there. And of course, lunch will be served. Commissioner Stedman, I did find a vendor for those sandwiches, so I'll be sure you get the sandwich of your choice. And for any other information you'd like, and please reach out to Chris Bell or myself at the address below or the phone number. And that concludes my report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Hey, Eric, you mentioned a float plan, and before you got to that slide, I was going to ask you about that. But do people that don't, have families, or maybe people that are visiting our harbor and staying over a couple nights, do they ever file a float plan with you guys, the Harbor Patrol?
Commissioner Stedman, good question. No, not usually. We recommend that they do that directly with a friend, a relative, anybody that they can give that information to that can contact us. But the Harbor Patrol, no, we do not take a float plan.
Okay.
All right, do we have further comments? Questions? I have a comment. First of all, thank you very much for that informative report. You mentioned a couple of things that I wanted to hit on. First of all, firstly, you mentioned windy.com, and that website has quickly become the go-to weather source for the professional mariner. I see it from people all up and down the California coast. They have several different weather models to choose from with different resolutions and different refresh periods and time frames that they forecast forward and so forth. I would definitely recommend that. This past season has been this spring has been an especially windy one with especially cold water. Especially for folks that are planning on heading east, like towards the east end of Santa Cruz Island, you want to check and see what that afternoon is going to bring you in your face on the way back home to Santa Barbara Harbor. It's definitely a lot better than ending up stuck out at the island overnight, which is a lot better than being stuck in the middle of the channel bouncing around. Also, for folks that have never actually attempted to use a fire extinguisher or launch a handheld flare, that is another program that's well worth your time. It's just surprising what you find out you don't actually know how to do once you actually get one of those things in your hands. And remember, if you ever need to use a flare, you probably won't be able to read the instructions. You'll have to do it by feel. So there you go. Thank you. And with that, I'd like to move us along to new business.
Well, thank you, Vice Chair. Yeah, great points, especially on the flares and the fire extinguishers. It's really nice to be able to use those in a controlled environment. And again, with Windy, I've been using it for a couple of years now in conjunction with the National Weather Service. But you're right, spot on. It's an awesome tool. So thank you.
To Brian Bossy, I'd like to turn to you for new business. It looks like we have a proposed lease agreement.
That is correct, Acting Chair McCray. This evening, before you for consideration is a proposed lease with Blue Water Hunter. Blue Water Hunter has been a staple of the harbor community since the early 2000s. And in September of 2019, the lease was transferred to Mr. Jethro Acosta. And Mr. Acosta is an experienced local waterman. He has been involved in the local waterman community for quite some time. He brings a lifetime of spear fishing and scuba experience to Blue Water Hunter. So we encourage everybody who's interested to go on down and chat with Jethro. He's got quite an amazing amount of knowledge when it comes to the ocean. The particular lease space is 117D Harbor Way. It's about 878 square feet. Next slide, please. And since assuming the lease about 18 months ago, Mr. Acosta has significantly improved the space by updating the interior and offering a much more expansive selection of products. These are just some of the improvements he's done: new flooring, new paint, new lighting, a brand new security system. He completely renovated the compressor and filtration system that fills tanks. He has a new point of sale system, new displays throughout. He's improved their website. He has a new tank rack and workbench area in the back. And he's completely remodeled the upstairs, which will soon house a lot of local fishing equipment geared towards local species, the islands, and things like that. Next slide, please. Got a couple of photos for you. So this is right when you come in the entrance off to the left, trying to take it all in. As you can see, I mean, just a very class act. He's definitely establishing this as a premier dive shop in the Santa Barbara area. Next slide, please. This is from the opposite corner looking back out towards the entry area. Again, every time you go in there, Mr. Acosta is improving something in one way or another. So I encourage everybody to go down there and check out Blue Water Hunter. As far as the lease terms, next slide, please. We're proposing a 5-year term with a base rent of $2,719.10. He does pay a percentage rent, and it's depending on the type of sales activity. And he does, along with all of our other tenants, have a cost of living increase based on the Consumer Price Index. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I should let you know that by way of the improvements and all that he's done to the space, Mr. Acosta has increased the revenue or the sales revenue on that lease space by 130% in the short time he's been there. So he's one of the few businesses in this COVID timeframe who's doing exceptionally well. So that's a sign of, I believe, good things to come, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the commission might have.
Do we have questions?
Ryan, did we help out with any of those TIs that he did, tenant improvements?
We did not. That was all Mr. Acosta taking that on himself.
Wow, that's awesome.
Over time, yeah, I really encourage you to go in there. It's quite a transformation.
Yeah, I was in there a few weeks ago, so it looked really nice. So
yeah, good. And the results show. I mean, it's a nice place. People are going to come, and they sure do.
Yeah, so based on that, I'd like to make a motion that we approve this.
Do we have a second?
Second.
I'll Would you like to speak to your motion at all? Mr. Sloan? Are you there?
Were you talking to me, Mayor?
Yeah.
Oh,
I just asked if
I'm
you
sorry, I missed that. Could you repeat it, please, your question?
Would you like to speak to your motion before we put it to vote?
But I would make a motion that we approve the proposed lease and forward it to council.
All right, very well then. Just to check and see if we've got any public comment on this.
At this time, there are no hands raised.
All right, then I'll call for the question. We'll dare to do a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? The motion passes unanimously. It looks like the next order of business is subcommittee reports. And so I think, let's see, who would like to start this off?
I think Director Wiltshire is going to kick us off with an overview. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that for the commission. And this came onto the agenda just yesterday because there was a slip assignment subcommittee meeting on Wednesday or Tuesday, one of the days this week. I'm getting mixed up. But anyway, the point is it's been a pretty productive subcommittee meeting, and so I'll run through a little bit of history. Angela, do you want to go to the next slide, please? So just to bring the rest of the Harbor Commission up to date, and so the members on the slip assignment subcommittee are Commissioners Sloan, Nelson, and Stedman. Back in July of 2020, so last summer, the Waterfront gave a presentation to the entire Harbor Commission on the slip assignment policy. And really the interest was significant enough to kind of take an action and form a subcommittee meeting to further dig into slip transfer fees and really the slip assignment policy as a whole. And so in September of 2017, the Harbor Commission formed the slip assignment policy subcommittee meeting. The first meeting occurred in October. And then there were subsequent meetings in January and February, March, and April of this year. And so a few issues really kind of rose to the surface. So first most, there was this issue of county possessory interest tax. The subcommittee had a speaker from the county assessor's office to kind of really dive into depth on the county possessory interest tax of slips. The individual from the county made himself very available, and it was a really good presentation. And so that kind of clarified and allowed the committee to kind of move on from that as something that's not so much in the waterfront or the city's domain. The other major item was the concept of adding adult family members to slip permits. And that item is still in discussion and pending. The committee's waiting for some legal advice from our attorney, some input from the State Lands Commission. And so that's one of the items that's still pending. And then most recently in March and April of this year, the last two meetings, we really dove into the slip permit transfer fee, the rates themselves and how they're structured. More notably, last meeting, we even took a deeper dive. As far as history goes, that's where we're at to date. Do any of the commissioners have any questions, or do the subcommittee members want to speak to that history a little bit?
Yeah, I don't. I think we can probably move ahead. I think the point on this is that we've met just about every month this year, and we met several times last year, and we've had a lot of public input as well. These are meetings that are attended by the public, and they do speak, and so we have had a lot of input on that. And so I think that the two things that would, as Mike pointed out, that are within the waterfront's purview is the inheritance issue, adding children to the slip, not the inheritance per se, but adding children to the slip permit at a rate different than what the slip transfer would be if it were between two parties. And then the second thing is just where we are with the slip transfer fee together. And so I think there's a slide that talks to that last item, two slides that we have that talk to that last item, the transfer fee, and where we're at with that and where we might be headed with it. And I think if you've read the proposals here, one of the things is we'd like to, with your permission, ask staff to go ahead and develop some proposal on that. And so why don't we talk through that if we could move on to the next slide. So I think everybody's probably seen this slide before. This is a slide that we use occasionally when we talk about this. And you can see that this is a percentage of the value of the transfer fee relative to the private market value of the permit. And so, you know, you can see that the smaller slips have had a higher percentage of transfer fee than the larger slips. And over the years, we've increased the value, we've increased the slip transfer fee every year on the larger slips, and we've frozen the slips 30 and under. And you can see through time, we're starting to bring those a little bit more in line. And so the proposal, what we talked about in the last meeting, this meeting yesterday, was how do we get so that we use a percentage of the transfer value, the private market value, to set the slip transfer fee. And so we kind of settled on a 20% as something that's probably reasonable. We're required by the state land grant to get a substantial fee for the city for the value of this transfer. And so if we move to the next slide, this slide shows what would happen. The current method is, it shows there that the current slip transfer fee for a 20-foot slip is $200 and for a 60-foot is $525. If we said, okay, let's try and take a look at what 20% would be, or something very close to 20%, what would happen to those sizes in the transfer fee? And so the 20%, the 20-foot would drop to $100 a foot, and the 60-foot would raise to $1,150 a foot. And that's based on the best recent history we could get on the free market value of these slips. And a lot of it's anecdotal, so this is not a perfect science, but this kind of shows where it might go if we were to say, okay, let's use 20% as a target. And so based on that, and wrestling with this over a number of months, there were two things that kind of we thought we would do. Is one is we would ask the staff to develop a proposal and timeline of the transfer fee, tying it to this 20% of the slip market value in the shortest possible time frame. You know, and so we looked at what, as part of the presentation yesterday in discussion, we looked at a 10-year implementation of this. You know, to get from, let's just take the 60-foot, for instance, because that's the one that's probably the hardest hit. To go from the current rate of $525 to $1,150, what is a time frame that makes sense so that we just don't disrupt, one, the market for the transfer and the transfer fee revenue that we get, keeping it revenue neutral, as you can see there. And so we just have to wrestle with that. And there's a lot of nuances in this. And so we thought we'd just ask Mike and the team to develop this when they can and come back to the whole commission with a proposal on how we tie this. And the second talks to that the adult children transfer fee. And that is kind of nuanced in some of the legal issues that have to do with a land grant and things like that, and some of the other things that have to do with equity in the state and things like that. So we thought what we would do is ask the city's attorney's office to prepare a proposal on that, to talk about what the legal issues on the adult transfer, reducing the adult transfer fee, the adult child transfer fee, excuse me, I misspoke there. on that. So that's kind of what the proposal that we have here today is. As a full commission, just wanted to kind of bring you up to speed on it. And the second is to get your concurrence that we could ask both the waterfront staff and the city attorney's office to prepare these presentations.
I think it's also important to mention, though, let's not gloss over the fact that we need to do increased outreach to the community that's affected by any of this. That is a consistent thread of objection that's voiced by the people that have consistently attended the timeline of these meetings. So I think it's important to look at the economic numbers, but we also need to look at the PR aspect of this, make sure that we are tracking a very good outreach program. So I would ask the commissioners in full to keep that at the forefront of their minds too.
Yeah, good point, John. I forgot that, and I concur wholeheartedly on that. So we good with this?
All right, that's a great presentation. Do we have any public comment on this at all at this point?
We do have one hand raised, Mr. William Nash. I will call on him now.
Thank you.
Good evening, Harbor Commissioners. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. I'd like to just mention a couple things. With regard to slipholder outreach, perhaps that outreach, when it's written, can include a discussion of slipholder preference as to a per foot fee versus a percentage. I think the public might well have some input on that. So that should be an express question that's asked. The other question I think you should get some public input on what does the public in general view as a fair fee, given the movement that's afoot now. All right. And then the one other thing I'd like to point out is that if there's I guess there's one other area where people haven't looked at in terms of making life a little bit better for slip holders, which would be, currently for one transfer fee, you're allowed to add 2 people, and maybe that could be increased, the number of people, and people might feel a little bit better about what they're paying for. So if it's 2, perhaps 4, I don't know, but I think it's an idea that ought to be considered as well. And I think that's about all I've got for this evening. So thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Thank you very much. I'd like to turn to the rest of the Harbor Commission and see if there are any more questions of the Slip Assignment Policy Subcommittee at this point.
Barrett?
Yes, that's
Yeah, I don't have a question. I just like to make the observation that we did receive a letter from Lori Rafferty, and that should be on the record, I think, that she wrote. And I'm wondering, I asked last week or some point about whether letters from the public will be posted on the Harbor Commission website. I'm wondering what's happening about that.
Yeah, I can respond to that, Commissioner Kramer.
Thank you.
In the meantime, what we're doing is referencing all correspondence in the meeting minutes. So that's available to anybody who wants to request. And so you'll start seeing in our meeting minutes, there will be reference to anybody who has submitted any correspondence. That's kind of in line with how council handles this. And so we're kind of following suit with that. We can touch back on posting all of that onto the Harbor Commission website if that's the direction you want to go. We just need to find out kind of logistically how to do that. There's sometimes a fair amount of correspondence. So for now, we're going to reference the individual and their correspondence within the meeting minutes.
Okay, I know that some of the commissions do post their letters, do post the public letters on the on their website web pages. So I think that would be desirable.
Okay, we can look into that a little bit more.
Okay, thank you.
Any others?
Yes, I'm seeking clarification on recommendation B. The language is slip permit market value, and how the methodology that we use to accomplish, to determine that value. I want to make certain it's understood that we are going to look at a methodology that, one, is essentially developed by staff with market data that's available, sales data that's available. And another way was whether or not it was possible to get independent third-party appraisals of the property interest the slip permit represents as a simple arm's length way of determining the value. And as long as you say yes to that, I don't need to change the recommendation. I just want to make sure that the recommendation is broad enough to investigate that possibility.
Does anybody have anything to say in response? You know, any reassurance they can offer?
Yeah, I think, Michael, based on our conversation yesterday, that was implicit in this recommendation without, listing everything that might be required. It's obviously, how do we get that market value? And we've had a lot of discussion. So I think, so I think that would be what we would be looking for from staff and how to do that. So.
Very well.
Is there any further discussion?
I would just like to reiterate that is a nuanced point that Commissioner Nelson is raising, but Commissioner Sloan, I think, addressed it just the way we've been handling it. I mean, it is implicit, I think, in terms of the methodology. And I know that Director Wiltshire has been pretty careful in terms of assembling the data that's, presented to the public. So I really feel like we've been doing a pretty thorough job, in addressing this issue. And I hope that, we'll reach an amicable solution for everybody.
Anything further? With that, I'd entertain a motion. Do we have a motion that the Harbor Commission do the following under this recommendation?
I'm going to be on the subcommittee. Can we make motions, or do we need someone that's not on the committee?
I believe subcommittee members can make a motion and it'll still end up going to a vote.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we accept the recommendation.
I'll second that.
Very good. This may sound a little absurd, but does what's up on the recommendation there represent your motion?
Yes, it does. And, obviously there's a lot underlying all of these, and that's why we need to ask staff to go off and do work, and also ask the city attorney to do the same thing on these with, so I think there's a lot of underlying work that needs to be done. And we've talked about a lot of issues in the subcommittee that aren't directly reflected in these 3 sentences, but I think we understand the work that needs to be done. So,
very good. I will then call for the question. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any opposed? Abstentions? And there we go. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. I think that brings us almost to the close of the meeting this evening. I'm going to ask for commission staff and staff communications, if there are any.
None from staff, other than a hearty congratulations for our first meeting ending before 8 o'clock in quite some time.
Very good.
We're not there yet, Mike.
All right, it is that time. Would anybody like to make a motion that we adjourn?
So moved.
Second? I'll second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I,
Opposed? None? Very good. Thank you. It was a great meeting. We'll look forward to seeing everybody next month.
Good job, Merritt.
Thanks,
Thanks,
great
Bob.
job, Eric. Thank you.